Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Define Disaster. This is Battlefield 4. Today we're going to be comparing the RPK to its brother, the RPK-12, with the aim of finding out which of the two guns is the better choice. The RPK, or as it's formerly known, the RPK-74M, and its brother, the RPK-12, are not guns you will find too frequently being used on the battlefield in Battlefield 4, and this has its reasons and its own rights, and we will be talking about that a little later on in the video. But personally, I actually like these guns. I find them to be very effective at what they're good at and what they're meant for, which is why I decided to make this video today. Now, these guns share more than just a similarity in name. They have a number of stats that make them similar, but they also have a number of key differences, which we're going to be looking at today. But before we jump the gun on which of the two here is better, let us actually get into each weapon separately and analyze the statistics available. The RPK is a high damage model weapon. Now, what this means is it has a higher max damage, allowing it to perform a so-called 4-shot instead of 5-shot kill on your enemy all the way out into 36 meters in the case of the RPK. Its min damage at 20 may not seem like much, but it's actually enough to keep this gun at a 5-shot kill at any distance, usually having a leg up on something like an assault rifle, say a SAR 21. Its fire rate is relatively low to compensate for this higher damage model, as all higher damage models usually have a relatively low fire rate at 600 rounds per minute. However, this is at the bottom of the barrel, but this doesn't really matter because this gun isn't really meant as close quarter king. The magazine size of the RPK is actually quite unusual. It has 40+1 or 41 bullets in total, allowing for a little bit more flexibility when to choose your reload, allowing to engage multiple targets without being too worried about having to run out of bullets anytime soon. However, not coming with the drastic negativity of having, say, a box magazine on something like an LSAT and then having to go through a 7, 8, 9 second long reload. Speaking of reload times, they are not fast on the RPK, but given that we are talking about a larger magazine here, not a standard 30+1, they are definitely bearable with a short reload of 3.15 seconds and a long reload of 4.2. Basically, if you're in close quarter combat, these statistics actually do matter, and the RPK is close quarter capable thanks to its higher damage model, and this makes this weapon very flexible. So if in close quarter, you're going to want to make sure you have at least one bullet left in that chamber, because otherwise you're going to end up doing a 4.2 second long reload, which can get you killed if you're not careful. Moving on to recoil then, at 0.36, the horizontal recoil of this gun is not too hefty. However, considering that you're going to want to use this at longer ranges very frequently, it can be a little hindrance to the performance of the gun. However, it is not at the stage where it actually hampers it to a point of no effectiveness at all. Recoil to left and right is also not horrible, yet definitely noticeable at 0.3 degrees to the left and 0.2 degrees to the right. Lastly, of course, we're going to have to talk about the first shot recoil multiplier. This is relatively low at 1.25, means that you won't have a kind of first shot kick that throws your accuracy off immediately, but of course you do have to deal with your normal recoil being quite hefty if you're trying to shoot at targets at longer range. Moving on to the accuracy of a gun, you have a standard 0.2 ADS value, meaning that you can be very accurate with your shots when you place them. However, once you start moving, this gun really isn't too great. As most LMGs, it's not a great gun to be moving with. Admittedly, it's better than a lot of the LMGs out there, so it forgives a little bit more if you're hip firing or moving and ADSing, but it's certainly not recommendable because, for example, you have a 4.5 accuracy multiplier for hip firing and standing while moving, and that's compared to something like a 3.25 or 3.5 for an assault rifle. Moving on then to the RPK-12. This gun sports a standard damage model of 24.5 as max damage and 18 as minimum damage, performing your average 5-shot or 6-shot kills starting from 47 meters onwards. The fire rate of the gun is relatively low, like its brother the RPK, or formerly known as the RPK-74M. It sports a 600 rounds per minute fire rate with a relatively large magazine of 61 bullets, or 60+1 if you will. Now, not only does this gun have a large magazine making engagements of multiple targets very easy without having to worry about reloading anytime soon, its reload time is actually quite competitive for an LMG, especially considering its relatively large magazine size. We are talking about a magazine twice the size of your average assault rifle. With 2.4 seconds with one or more bullets left in the chamber, you can actually reload this gun comfortably even in close quarter without worrying that you're going to be caught mid-reload too often. Its reload when empty at 3.3 seconds is a little more hefty, however, nothing unimaginable, and if you compare this to something like the FAMAS, it actually becomes quite competitive, even though we're talking, of course, about a gun that isn't meant for close quarter combat. Moving on then to recoil, we have an 0.27 vertical recoil, that is 0.27 degrees per shot. Now once more, we have a relatively medium level amount of recoil, given that we're talking about a long range gun, especially in the case of the RPK-12. This is slightly damaging to the performance, but if you can control your vertical recoil or you're willing to slap on necessary attachments, this shouldn't be a hindrance to the weapon's performance. On the other hand, its recoil to left and right is relatively low, actually very low, for the gun at 0.14 and 0.08. It basically allows you to not worry about horizontal recoil when shooting that sniper out in the distance. Lastly, for recoil, we have the first shot multiplier at 1.35. This is slightly higher than the RPK, but once more, relatively low. This gun desperately does not need a angled foregrip, which is of course always nice. Moving on to the accuracy of the gun, once more we have a standard 0.2 ADS value. However, as the RPK, this gun suffers when you're moving and firing. This is definitely a weapon you want to use, as all LMGs, when standing still. However, as the RPK, it's not as bad as your average LMG, with 4.5 as value of accuracy when hip firing and moving and standing all at the same time. So let's move on then to what makes these guns different from each other, what separates them, and which of the two is better at what. So these guns share not only their name, but also a number of key statistics, but they also have a number of differences that basically separates these two weapons into two different categories of weapons. On the one hand, you have the RPK, which you could actually categorize as an all-rounder weapon, comparable to something like the M416 or ACE-23, and then you have something like the RPK-12, which is definitely a long distance gun, comparable to something like the SAR-21 or AR-160. So let's get into what makes these guns these specific gun roles. The RPK-74M, thanks to its higher damage model, performs well at every distance. You can use this gun at close quarter and at long range comfortably without worrying that you're usually gonna get outclassed by whatever your enemy is using. Of course, you're not gonna beat out the user of a FAMAS in close quarter engagement combat in TDM, and you're not gonna beat out somebody using the SAR-21 at 100 meters on rush. But you will stand a suitable chance. As you would with something like an M416, you have an adaptable gun that performs well in all situations, and that is worth a hell of a lot in Battlefield, where engagement distances vary a lot. And this comes down to basically its damage model. That's what makes this gun so good at all distances, and what hampers it to become perfect at long ranges is, of course, the slightly higher recoil. The RPK-12, on the other hand, doesn't have this higher damage model, which means it doesn't perform as well at close quarter combat. For a matter of fact, at 600 rounds per minute with a 5-shot kill, you have to be hitting headshots to actually beat somebody using something like a FAMAS or AEK in close quarter combat, unless of course you have the jump on your enemy. And it does have this larger magazine to help it perform a little bit better at medium range or close quarter combat, but it is still no match to something like the RPK in close quarter combat. On the other hand, it has slightly less recoil than the RPK, vitally, especially horizontal recoil, which means that this gun is very usable at long ranges. Combined with its large magazine size, you can just take down an entire squad at 50 to 75 meters if you choose to do so. So with the two roles of the guns explained, do we use different attachments for them? The answer to that question is not really. There may be slight differences, especially depending on your playstyle, but for me personally, there's only really one difference in attachment I will use for these guns. But let's start with the optics. Obviously, you choose whichever optic you prefer. For me, it's the Coyote red dot sight. For some of you, it may be the Cobra or any other sight available in the game. I like to slap on laser sights on my guns to help while moving and hip firing. I've explained this in previous videos. I am somebody who is capable of switching off the laser sight when I notice I'm getting into situations where I'm being spotted through smoke. Other players have more difficulties with this or just don't want to have to actually pay attention to that. So for in those cases, you may want to not actually use a laser sight. In the case of the RPK, I actually use a muzzle brake on my barrel to further help me extend this weapon's engagement distance to actually perform excellently at long range distances. And this gun can compete with the RPK-12 at longer ranges if you slap on a muzzle brake on top of that barrel. For the RPK-12, on the other hand, I don't use any barrel attachment at all. There is no need for it, frankly. A heavy barrel would just make recoil control more difficult, and given that this is a long range gun, you don't really want to actually have additional recoil to deal with, and the base recoil of this gun is already challenging enough while not game breaking. For the underbarrel attachment, once more, we've got the same thing. I like to use a vertical grip on both my guns because it allows me to strafe while shooting and helps me perform hip firing more reliably. Not that you should be hip firing these guns unless you're in very close quarter, but a vertical grip also, as said, helps strafing, which is very useful when you're trying to fight that pesky sniper head glitching on some roof on Dawnbreaker Rush. So do we have a clear winner in this weapon showdown? Yes, we do. At least in my opinion, the RPK, formerly known as the RPK-74M, outclasses the RPK-12 pretty much in every situation, especially if you slap that muzzle brake on there. This gun is almost as good, if not equally as good, at long distance combat, and definitely better at medium ranges and close quarter combat than the RPK, simply because of the higher damage model. Yes, there's a little bit more recoil that you have to control, longer reload times, and a smaller magazine, but usually, unless you're engaging 5 people at once, these factors do not play too much role, given that you have decent recoil control. The RPK-12, however, isn't a bad gun simply because it loses out against the RPK. The RPK is one of the best LMGs in the game, in my opinion, actually. Probably the best, on par with the LSAT, because the MG4 and AWS kind of lost their spot as best LMGs once they got nerfed into having a little bit too much recoil and too much spread. So the RPK-12 is something you should definitely try out if you haven't yet, especially if you have difficulties controlling recoil. I'm speaking to some of my console viewers out there. I don't know how good your recoil control is, but I've been told by some of my friends who play consoles it's a little bit more difficult to kind of keep your target on sight using a joystick versus, of course, a mouse. The RPK, on the other hand, is something you must have tried out. It's a fantastic gun if you can program yourself not to strafe too much, or if you slap on the attachments like I do to allow myself to strafe because I don't want to change my playstyle. You're going to go on massive kill streaks with these guns. They're excellent weapons to use, and I would definitely recommend you try them out. I'm interested to know what your experience, however, is with both of these guns. Are you a fan of the RPK-12 and hate the RPK, or do you agree with my judgment and analysis of the data available on these guns? Feel free to comment down below your experiences with either of these guns or both of these. Let me know how you feel about my analysis of this. Feel free, of course, to leave video suggestions in the comments as well. As per usual, I'm currently working on a video on time to kill in TDM, looking at weapons, and that's of course a suggestion by one of my viewers, so that will be coming up next on this channel. But otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this video. As per usual, feel free to rate and comment if you have anything to say. But otherwise, I hope to see you in the next Battlefield 4 video.